Well, folks, I have a very, very good show today, and there's a channel on YouTube that I started watching going back, I guess, a few weeks ago. And the way the presentations were put together, the attention to detail was great, the message was articulated well, and Kat was covering ground that I've gotten into myself, but as we were talking offline, there's no way any one person can cover everything that is included in the memoirs of Billy Shears, and especially as it pertains to the occult, the esoteric, and the mystical aspects that are contained and encoded in the book. So, Kat, I want to thank you very much for accepting the invite to come on the show. And I guess to get started, if you could just cover with the audience your journey. How did you wind up doing what you're doing as far as your Beatle presentation and
Sure.
analysis?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on and coming to talk to me. It's really kind of you. Um, well, my journey is sort of a slightly meandering one, really. I think some people like to talk about the moment that they woke up and realized things weren't as they seemed, but mine sort of, well, to steal a phrase from the illumined ones, it was a case of being illuminated by degrees, I suppose. And so, first thing to note is really that I was born about 3 months before John Lennon was shot. And that in this journey is like turning up to a party when it's just finished. And that's good and bad because you've missed all the hype and you've missed all the propaganda. So you're not really affected by it, but you also don't know anything, right? So that's good and bad. And I remember as a little kid, my household, the Beatles were no one. They were nothing. They were never played. They were never mentioned. My my mother, in particular, had and still has a pathological hatred of the Beatles. If they came on the radio or the TV, they were straight off. So it was like just dead air, basically, where the Beatles were concerned.
Did she ever explain why she had those
Oh,
feelings?
because she did a lot of factory work in the 60s, and the factories would have radios on, and it was just Beatles, 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 and she just couldn't stand it anymore. You know, she just wanted to be away from it. The rest of my family, they were just indifferent. So, but that's good in a sort of weird way because I started like tabula rasa, blank slate. You come at it with no assumptions whatsoever. And so, like when you're a kid, as I'm sure many people with children, particularly small children who've ever been embarrassed by their children, they just say things. They just come out with things because they've seen a thing and they're going to say it. And it was kind of like that. And I remember it was sort of 1987. It was the 20th anniversary of Sergeant Pepper. It was 20 years to go to 20 years ago today. That's the phrase, isn't it? That it starts with. And there was all this sort of commotion on TV, documentaries and stuff, celebrating Sergeant Pepper and everything. And I thought, well, what's the hell this all about? And I think off the back of that, they released the VHS videos of the films, sort of around the same time. And so I would have been, I don't know, 6.5, 7. And I mean, God bless my mother. She does have a pathological hatred of the Beatles. And yet I said to her, because I saw these adverts for the films, I want to watch the films. Can I have the films, Mummy? And she gave me a look of, really? Must I endure this? But she bought them anyway. God bless her. And I watched Hard Day's Night, which was kind of weird because I wasn't used to seeing things in black and white, and Help. And then I watched Magical Mystery Tour. And then I just looked at it and went, oh, who's this guy? They've got a new actor playing Paul. And that's how I thought of it. I thought, well, these are just films, right? They are actors playing musicians. Because my older brother was really into the Monkees. And I thought it was like that. I didn't think anything of it. So there's a new actor playing Paul. That's the first thing. And so let's whiz forward a few years. What would it be? 93, 94. I was 13. And with some pocket money, I finally buy a copy of Sergeant Pepper. And bear in mind that I still don't know anything. I don't own any Beatles material other than the films. I don't own any other albums, nothing. And it was such a bizarre experience. And I need to tell you two things first, and then you'll understand why. So, firstly, I have synesthesia. Do you know what that is?
No, what is that?
Okay, so when I hear music, I can taste it, and I can smell it, and I perceive it in color. So it's quite psychedelic all by itself.
That's very interesting you should say that because whenever I listen to psychedelic music and I used to listen to Sgt. Pepper, I used to sense color.
Yeah. A lot of musicians get the color thing, but to get the smelling and the taste thing as well is a bit more rare.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. So I'll park that for a moment. That will matter in a minute. The other thing is that at the end of 1987, I'd been involved in a very severe, near fatal car crash. And, well, I mean, obviously any car crash is traumatic, but that one was particularly traumatic. I mean, our car was completely and utterly wrecked. There was not a piece of glass left intact. And I remember this whirlwind of glass just slashing me from head to toe. And I remember the being covered in blood. I remember the blood in my eyes, the blood in my mouth, the smell of it, the smell of my own fear, really. When I listened to Sgt. Pepper for the first time at 13, I am used to having these sort of synesthesia, sort of smells, tastes, colors. But what I get when I listen to Sgt. Pepper, just the A side, because I bought it on cassette tape, I get flashbacks of my own car crash.
Is that right?
And I've never experienced anything like that with music. Absolutely crazy. I get full horror flashbacks of my own car crash. And I couldn't understand why. And it was just such a weird experience. I don't know whether it was like I tapped into something subconsciously or whether it was like a psychic thing. I really don't know, but it was very, very weird. And, I know there's, at the end of the album, he blew his mind out in a car, but I hadn't got to any of that. So there was no car connotations on that A side. So that was very, very weird. And, but I bought the album and I forced myself to listen to the end. And I get to the end and I think, wow, I feel really emotionally drained. I feel sad, like I've just been to a funeral. And then, now I realize I had been to a funeral. It's right there on the front cover. It is a funeral. And so that was really weird. But at the time, I didn't understand it. So let's go forward a little bit further. So I'm a music teacher now. I've been a music teacher for almost 23 years. But, 25 years ago, I was still a student. And when I was a music student, I had to do a project for, I think it was popular music theory. And it was listening to and critiquing all of the songs in chronological order on all 13 studio albums of the Beatles released in the UK. It was a massive undertaking to actually analyze every single song on all of those albums in chronological order. And I got to the end of that project, and what was immediately obvious to me was that it was absolutely impossible to me that they had written all of that unaided. Absolutely not. I thought, wow, the Beatles must have seriously had help.
How did you come to that conclusion? What was the criteria that you applied to come to that conclusion?
Well, some of the music was too sophisticated. Some of it was harmonically too sophisticated. Some of it was rhythmically unlikely. Some musical devices that hadn't been used for hundreds of years were present in that music. Cadences that haven't been popular since the medieval period suddenly turned up. It was a mixture of things. But I just thought that, well, let's stand back from it. I mean, I'm a music student. I'd done my grade 8 when I was 14. I, had a fairly good grounding in music theory, even as a student. And I thought, well, if I had to write this, what would I do? How would I have coped? And I would have struggled. I mean, you can say, well, they're very talented, but that only takes you so far. There has to be some underlying skill set to fall back on. And I just didn't feel that they had it. And then, of course, there's the sheer volume of it. There's a lot of it in a short space of time. And then, of course, there's the fact that it varies wildly in terms of its quality. It's quite consistent in the first half. And funnily enough, it's actually after Billy turns up that it actually goes up and down. And I kind of think that some of it they were helped on and some of it they weren't, particularly when you listen to the White Album. And I mean, even George Martin said they could have had one single really good tight album,
Right.
but they chose not to. And that's, I think, because Billy wanted to have 33 tracks, but he didn't quite make it, and he only got to 30, but only by including everything. So it was a whole bunch of different things, but I felt pretty sure, just looking at it, that they must have had help. And I remember actually talking to like other students and teaching staff and trying to discuss this point, and I was really shut down. The notion that the Beatles were anything less than 100% fabulous was not going to be tolerated, which is why I'm very cagey about talking about it from a professional point of view now. Because if you're wound up by that, we haven't even got to the esoteric stuff. We haven't even got to the Luciferian stuff. You know what I'm saying?
No, I understand. And the thing is, Kat, I have sources that I'm connected into. They know what the score is. They know what the true story is. But they have said to me, because I've asked them, I said, would you mind coming on to the show to talk about your experience as a sound engineer and those types of things? And they have said, no can do. Because if it gets out that they think this way, or they're leaning that way, or that they're questioning the official narrative of the Beatles, they're convinced that there's going to be consequences. Being fired as an example, or if you don't get fired, it would be a situation where, in their case, where work will dry up.
Oh, yeah. I can well believe it.
Yeah, so now I understand why you have a reluctance to, to just put yourself out there.
Mm.
I completely get it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do see the idea. Don't get me wrong. I mean, mostly I teach classical music, classical piano. That's my first instrument. But every now and again, we'll do something for fun, just popular stuff for fun. And if we do anything, if we play any songs by the Beatles, I will just sort of seed the idea in their heads. Like, can you imagine writing this without knowing all the music theory that you know, that I've taught you? And they'll say to me, no, I can't imagine doing it. I don't know how they did it. I'm like, yeah, I want you to ponder on that thought.
Yep.
So, and that's about as much as I can say.
Well, I have another person who is a music instructor, actually. I think she's a professor, and she has done the same thing. She understands that they didn't write all their own music for the very reasons that you just expressed. And when she interacts with her students, she also tries to seed it in a way so that she's not leading them, but she wants them to critically think through the process. So I think it's great that you're doing that, because what you're really doing is pushing back on the conditioning that has shaped the minds of the entire world with regard to the Beatles' official narrative.
Yeah, there's all of that. And the other thing that I noticed actually when I did that project was them. I mean, I'm not a guitarist, I'm a pianist. Paul suddenly became very good at the piano.
Yeah.
And I looked at this guy and thought, I don't know who you are, but you've had years of formal training. You've had the same years of formal training that I had, in fact. That's what I'm thinking. Because, I mean, he says in the book he started playing when he was 3. So did I. I started playing in 1983. So it's almost 40 years. So I well relate to where he was.
Well, it's interesting. I have a lot of songwriters and musicians who are subscribers to the channel, and it's easier for them to pick up on certain aspects of the songs, of the performance, the playing, whether it be on the recording itself or what we see in videos as quote unquote live, to discern a lot more with what they're hearing and what they're seeing. And because of that, they have an easier ability to question the official narrative.
Yeah.
Because we know, I mean, I'm a guitar player. I've always said that whenever I went to a live show, a concert, I never listened to music the same way as probably most people in the audience because I was always listening for the guitar parts.
Sure.
I was listening to the lead guitar playing. I was listening to how the rhythm guitar playing was being played. I was listening for these things. So it was more of a technical type of listening versus somebody who doesn't have a musical background and can just sit back. And in a way, it's probably a lot happier way to listen to the music. In other words, you're just taking the music in versus scrutinizing it, which is what I find myself doing, or what I would do if I went to live shows or even listening to recordings.
Yeah. It's easy to let it just wash over you if you don't know any better. Yeah, absolutely.
You got started, you said by 1987, you were 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah. Like I said, it's sort of illumination by degrees. I didn't understand any of the things I went through.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know anything about PID. I didn't know anything about the PSYOP and the conspiracy. I just knew that there were these weird things that had happened. And it wasn't really, I think, it's fairly recent, like 2018 or something. I watched your videos and some other people's videos and finally got a copy of Memoirs. It was the 9 after 909 edition, and read that. And then all the pieces of the puzzle suddenly came together. And I thought, oh, yes, the multiple Pauls, the fact that they clearly didn't write all of their own music, the flashbacks of a car crash. I mean, all of it. You know, Paul suddenly being a very good pianist. It suddenly made sense. And so that's where I am now, really. And I started to just very gently research it because it was such an interesting story. And it's like you've said as well, it's a gateway to other conspiracies and psyops.
Yeah, and the book is a big puzzle. It's inviting you to not only to decode the book, but part of that decoding process is to go outside the book.
Oh, yeah.
Because if the book had to contain everything, it wouldn't be 666 pages. It would be 6,666
Well,
pages.
absolutely. And that sort of makes me wonder about a whole bunch of things because, like, there are chapters in the book, but I'm not sure why they're there. So, I mean, you know, Billy's had a big, full life. You could say he's had several, in fact. And they've made, for esoteric reasons, this limit of 666 pages and 66 chapters. And that necessarily means you have to leave stuff out. You can't put everything in.
Right.
So why is there a chapter on Ireland? Why is there a chapter on, I know he did that song, you know, give Ireland back to the Irish and everything, but beyond the small Crowley connotations, because he declared himself an Irishman, which I always found risible as someone who is half Irish. Beyond those connections, I don't quite know why it's there. And it takes up a fair chunk of space. And I kind of think that this book is put together quite meticulously. Nothing is there that isn't meant to be there. So why is it there? Is it because otherwise we're led to believe that he just wants the British to be nicer to the Irish or something? And I wouldn't say otherwise. You know, I'm half English, half Irish. Exactly so. But why is it there? It's because it's a chapter you could just gloss over.
Yeah, and it's not to say he doesn't want that, but there's more to it. And I agree with you, Kat, that whatever is in that book is supposed to be in that book, and there's a reason for it. Let me ask you, so the first edition of Memoirs was the 9 after 909 edition. That's what you bought first?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the first one, I believe, that had the footnotes in it. What do you think of the book as a whole? Because you know all of the knocks against it. People will say, well, it's historical fiction and Billy's a liar and all of this stuff. What's your view of the book overall?
Well, I think that the way it's been put together, I can't help but think that most of it is probably true. Obviously, there has to be some things that aren't true deliberately, so that if they needed to discredit it, they could. But I think, yeah, it must be mostly true. There's too many things that tie up. There's too many things that cross from one topic to another, one conspiracy to another, one psyop to another. But I just can't help but feel there's something to it.
Yeah, and what I found is when you research to either debunk or to prove what is being said in the book, for me personally, the vast majority of the research took me to a place where I had to step back and say, this book overall is truthful. And I ran this by Tom, actually, going back a number of years ago. I realized that part of the thread of fiction in the book is on the reader. So in other words, if the person reading the book doesn't want to embrace something or believe something, in other words, the example I use sometimes is, if you don't believe Aleister Crowley was that important, or that he has any influence on the Beatles or any other band or pop culture or with the occult, and you think he's a carnival barker, when you read the book, you're going to interpret that as, well, that's a fictional aspect of the book.
Okay. I'd never really thought of it like that.
Yeah. So what's happened is the fiction actually has been pushed back on the reader. So if you don't read the book with an open mind and you're closed off, or you read the book because you have some other dogmatic agenda, then these pieces of the book that he's explaining, if you don't look into them, if you're not critically thinking, then you're going to just push it off as fiction. As an example, you probably know where I stand as far as Billy playing the role of Vivian Stanshall in the Bonzo Dog Band.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And there are people that will adamantly disagree, no matter how much proof you show them, or I should say how much evidence you show them that he did play that character. If you're going to go into the book and you're convinced that that didn't happen and he did not play Stanshall, then that piece of the book is fiction. And we can go right down the line, right? Because the book brings in a lot of different types of information where if the person reading it is not objective and is not open to reading it and then doing some research, they're going to not only miss a lot. What I've said is that for folks who are in the Paul is Dead research or the Paul is Dead community, for those who haven't read the book and want to say that they're Paul is Dead researchers or investigators, they have a pretty big hole in their resume.
Oh, I think it's almost impossible.
Yeah. So anyway, I digressed a little bit there, but that's what I concluded as far as what a big piece of the fiction was. And when I contacted Tom going back, I guess 3 or 4 years ago, when I came to this conclusion, he did not say it was not how it was set up. In other words, he didn't say, oh no, Mike, that's, you're reading into it the wrong way. So a lot of times it's what's not said.
Yeah.
Is your answer.
I must say, actually, talking about Vivian and the Bonzos, I mean, I was an art student as well as a music student, and it's a very art student thing to be into. And we used to play the Bonzos whilst painting.
Did you really?
And yeah, we loved the Bonzos. And it was one of the biggest surprises of this book, in fact, to find that he was Vivian. I think of all the times I've played Gorilla, that first album. All the times I've listened to Big Shot, which is my favorite track from that album. I did not know. I was so stunned. But it makes sense. It really makes sense.
This is crazy because you're listening to the Bonzos years and years after those recordings were recorded.
Well, my high school was kind of a curious place because basically my year group was made of two groups of people, broadly speaking. There were either the children of hippies who had fantastic vinyl collections, which is why we knew about the Bonzos, or they were very evangelistic, conservative Christians. And I was really neither, to be honest, but I probably leaned more towards the children of hippies because they had the good albums, basically.
Right.
So, and because if you're into art and music, you'll end up that way with that group of friends. So yeah, we played a lot of comedy albums. We played a lot of Monty Python and the Ruttles, and we played those whilst we were painting.
I love the Ruttles.
I love the Ruttles.
The music is great.
Yeah. I actually had a funny thought the other day when I was doing my video on the comedy connections, because I've been doing, maybe it's a bit sad, I don't know, but I've been sitting down and listening to all the Beatles albums backwards because I'm late to that party too. But I'm trying to write down all of the lyrics from beginning to end backwards.
You're doing that?
Yeah. Some of those songs are so much more interesting backwards than forwards. I think Penny Lane is fantastic backwards because he's talking about his struggle of losing his life and being Paul. And there's even a line actually in there where he says, "Why does she have to be a redhead?" Oh, is that about Jane? Mad. Anyway,
Are you looking to do a presentation on this when?
maybe. I mean, it'll be a pretty bloody big presentation.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I'll have
yeah.
to break
I'm
it
just
into
saying
bits, but yeah,
it would be fascinating, though.
something will come from it. But anyway, while I was doing that, whilst doing the video on the comedy connections, I actually thought to myself, if you play Russell's songs backwards, do you get backmasked messages?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't done it. I mean, one thing at a time. Blimey. There's already enough to do as it is. So, yeah, just a thought that occurred to me.
So at what point did you say to yourself, I'm going to start presenting on this? Because it's a big leap to put yourself out there and to start putting presentations together and all that.
Yeah, it really is. And my first thought was, I'm going to write it in a book or put together a website or something more passive, because I'm a pretty quiet sort of person, really, a bit of a hermit, you could say. And it was only actually because I started watching Jen's videos, Countess Powers, and we sort of became friends, and we were emailing each other backwards and forwards and bouncing ideas. And God bless her, she's fantastic. She put up with me asking her to do so many tarot card readings for me to see if she could find what I'd found without me telling her the details of the things I'd found. And she was very supportive. And she said, look, you need to just get it out there. You can't be passive about it. And she was extremely supportive. So I'm very grateful to her, actually, because I've only been posting for like 7 or 8 weeks or something. And I'm already talking to you, which is fantastic. And thank you very much for the opportunity. But if it wasn't for Jen, I wouldn't have posted anything at all.
Well, I had put a number of Jen's videos up on my community tab and also on my blog because I know that tarot is a very important piece of the occult. I have a good friend of mine who does tarot. She has done a number of readings for me, and those readings were spot on.
Yeah, it's astonishing when it happens like that.
It is, and if you have a tarot reader, a person who does tarot readings who is very good at what they do, then a reading can be extremely insightful.
Oh yeah, absolutely, no doubt. That's a thing that I've been interested in most of my life because my mother's father's family were Romany gypsies, and they were tarot readers, they were playing card readers, they read palms, they did tassiology. You name it, they did it. And so that's always been in the background for me. It's been a continual sort of thread in the background for me. But, tarot, you could easily dismiss it. I obviously don't. But it's more than just memorizing the meaning of a set of cards, shuffling them and making a narrative. You have to be a conduit. It's like you've asked a message to the universe and it's come back to you through the cards, through the reader as that conduit who has to be in tune with that message in order to you manifest it into the real world. And that's what Jen did, because there were lots of times when I just didn't tell her the nuts and bolts of something.
Right.
And she was spot on.
I'm completely on board with you as far as tarot goes. It's the same thing with astrology, Kat.
Oh, yeah.
Astrology is very, very important to the controllers, yet most people think that astrology is relegated to the horoscopes in a newspaper or online, and we can take it to numerology and gematria and a whole bunch of other stuff that most people are just not familiar with. And because they're not familiar with it, they just,
I think it deliberately gets downplayed so that people don't pay attention to it or think there's anything to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's very deliberate because they want to keep those sorts of things for themselves. They are gatekeepers of all sorts of knowledge. So it's not very surprising that they behave in that way.
Well, the Masons have a saying that if they give up the secrets, then they're feeding pearls to the swine.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're going to keep their knowledge to themselves because maintaining that knowledge is how they maintain control.
Yeah.
You're not going to give it out to the profane masses. But what we're seeing, though, at least in my opinion, is more and more of this knowledge is making its way out. And for those who are awake enough, or I shouldn't even say and intrepid enough, they can start putting the pieces together and becoming a lot more knowledgeable on how the controllers communicate. And it also helps, at least in my mind, to understand where they're going
Yeah, sure.
and how they think they're going to get there. I'm not an expert in it,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find this is why I don't, I'm not surprised at all when people want to sort of shy away from these things. That when I've done research that is connected to Crowley, you get to a certain point where you're like, I have to walk away for a while because I'm so overwhelmed by the darkness of it all, and I have to look after my own mental well-being, my own sort of psychic being. And there are times when I was doing, even just, I've read a lot of biographies, and I was sitting and thinking, I feel violated, like psychically and psychologically violated by having to think about it. But I want to know. And so one naturally leads to the other. So you've got to get on with it to some extent. But particularly when you actually read his own work, I'm a Buddhist. And the thing that really strikes me is I can see where the ideas came from. I can see that he's plundered a whole bunch of Eastern philosophies and religions, and then he's corrupted them for his own means. And as a Buddhist, that's actually quite offensive. And there are times in memoirs where, Zen Buddhism is mentioned. And it's usually alongside, the New Age movement and mysticism and Luciferianism. And I'm like, excuse me, I'd like to just remove myself as a Buddhist from all of this, because it's nothing to do with any of this. Buddhism's 600 years older than Christianity. It's not New Age. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, although we may spiritually believe, very different things from, say, a Christian, on a moral perspective, there's very little in it. If you're a Christian, you'll have 10 commandments, but if you're a Buddhist, you have 10 precepts. And they are things like do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, do not misuse the passions, do not misuse sex and sexuality. The fifth one is no intoxicants. You're not meant to drink or smoke or do drugs or anything. We're pretty square people, to be honest.
It's okay.
So the idea that we're aligned with the New Age thing and, psychedelic drug taking and Luciferianism is very offensive. And it sort of makes me think that although Christianity has been under attack since 1962, or actually I think it's further back than that, to be honest, but that's what it says in the book, in a weird sort of way through Crowley, things like Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Taoism, Shintoism, all of these sorts of things, they've been under attack for actually, weirdly, longer, because they've been plundered for these Thelemite works. And yeah, that's quite jarring when I have to read about that sort of thing.
Yeah, Crowley, I've done a lot of reading on Alistair as well, and he's very dark.
He is.
And people will say, well, you have to experience the extremes of duality, and that's what he was doing, and yada yada. But I don't buy it, Kat.
No, neither do I. I kind of think that his philosophy was basically think up or, find a taboo, and find a line that you're not meant to cross, and then immediately cross it, and then rinse, repeat.
Right.
So you just get darker and darker and darker. You go further and further down that rabbit hole.
And I think a lot of folks don't realize that his religion of Thelema is a religion of the elites.
Yeah.
And the adepts and the initiates and all of that, who are Thelemites, Luciferianism, those tenets of that religion are not applicable to the average person, to the people that are outside the pyramid. And so do as thou wilt, in my opinion, means that the elites they're going to impose their will.
Oh, yeah.
To create and manifest a reality that they want to create. And let me let me ask you this question, because being a Buddhist, so when the controllers go about doing what they're doing, and some people say, well, it's revelation of the method, and they do that in order to reconcile with karma. So if they tell you what they're going to do, and because you don't do anything about it, you don't say anything, that's consent.
Yeah,
Your silence is
not
consent.
work like that whatsoever. Not whatsoever. If they think that you can cheat natural law, you can't. You absolutely can't. We'd say that there's three kinds of karma. There's karma of the first order, which is things that happen as a result immediately. The second kind would be midterm. And third would be things so far out in the future you couldn't possibly dream them up. But it doesn't matter. If you've done something with ill intent, then it's going to come back. It has to come back on you. And you can't cheat these things.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And this is what I've said. You think that you received consent, but what you did was you engaged in deception and lies.
Of course you did.
So the fact that they would even think that somehow they escape some karmic consequences, right? Because it's the law of cause and effect, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's ridiculous. At face value, it's ridiculous. So I just wanted to get your opinion on it as a Buddhist. So we're in sync, which is great. I'm a deist, by the way. Some folks think that because of sometimes I'll express my spirituality that I'm Christian. I was born and raised Roman Catholic.
So was I, because I am half Irish, and my mother made a promise to my paternal grandfather that she would do so, because he was very adamant that, as a good Catholic himself, that we should be good Catholics as well.
Yeah, I walked from Catholicism and Christianity, for that matter, because I did spend some time also in a Christian non-denominational church, going back years and years ago. I think it benefits, at least me, Kat, because I'm able to step on the outside and be objective when I take a look at the different religions and the institutions that are in place, because you don't have a dog in the fight.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel exactly the same way. And particularly when you're looking at this whole Paulism thing, the reality is that the first New World Order was the Holy Roman Empire.
Right.
And its one world religion was Christianity. And a lot of Christians don't want to think like that. They don't want to think of it in those terms. So although they're trying to, basically get rid of it now to usurp it, they're trying to replace it. The fact that it was there in the first place is something to ponder at the very least, particularly when you look at places like the Vatican and you see like the Pope's audience hall is the head of a snake. And that place was put up in 1971. Those Luciferians have been there a long time.
A long time. Very long. And a big obelisk.
Absolutely. It's all there. All those pagan statues, they're all there.
Let me ask you about the narrative in memoirs, which talks about Osiris, Horus, the whole Egyptian mystery piece of the book. And Billy, the book tells us that he is an incarnation of Horus. Biological Paul represented Osiris. Billy represents Horus. And so there was the Osiris-Horus ritual that took place. And Billy's in his position of being in a savior type of role. I mean, I don't subscribe to it, just so everybody knows. Okay. So what's your take on that?
I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't believe it, but I don't have to. As I said, you just have to know that they do, and that's good enough. It all seems very, very bizarre to me. To me, the more interesting thing is how they're actually going to logistically go about things, how they're going to actually bring things about. So like one of the short videos I did was on the Vivaldi blueprint.
Yes.
And I thought, see, if you don't know about the life of Vivaldi, which seems to have been largely contrived, that little bit of the book wouldn't mean anything to you. But I think to myself, well, they basically got two ways to approach this. They either try to keep this story spinning forever, which is a lot of work, or they wait to a point where everyone in living memory of the Beatles has passed. They let the whole thing die down and then resurrect it many, many years down the line, and then they're free to embellish it however they like. It says on that big footnote on page 557 that Paul will be, sort of gifted stories of miracles like Jesus.
Right.
And I think that's probably a lot easier if you come at it sort of fresh, a couple of 100 years down the line. And I sort of think, well, that's what they did with Vivaldi. If you don't know about classical music and Baroque music, the idea that he could be basically forgotten for 200 years and then he has his entire career sort of almost magicked up, to be honest, but he has it reborn. And you can now say Vivaldi in the same breath, the same sentence as J.S. Bach. I teach the harmonization, of the style of J.S. Bach for a living. That man was a certified genius. And the idea that you can say Vivaldi in the same sentence as Bach, absolutely stunning. But, just a little while ago, no one had heard of him.
It's very similar to the story that we get with Jesus, right? So it was 300 years after we're told that Jesus was crucified that the Council of Nicaea convened to decide whether he was the actual Son of God or was he a prophet. So to put this into perspective, folks, can you imagine 300 years from now, somebody having a story about you? It's difficult to get your head wrapped around.
Yeah, it really is. But I do think that there's a benefit in eventually letting it die in order to bring it back and embellish it. And they can come back and say, oh, look, there's 1,000 songs by Paul McCartney we didn't know about. Look what we've discovered. Look, he walks on water. They can do all of that.
That footnote also says that Crowley will be put in a position as a prophet.
Yes, it does.
So it's very strange stuff.
Yeah. They're going to have to do a serious PR job on him, I think, in order to make him palatable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like I said, my studies and my research into him, I do not land on the side of, well, I think he was trying to do a good thing.
No. A lot of apologists, but I'm not one of them, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So with regard to memoirs, Kat, why do you think Billy wrote the book? Why do you think he put it all out there?
Well, I think he wants the credit. I often think of that film, Wag the Dog. Do you know that film?
Yes.
Having concocted a phony war in the media, he realizes that's his best work he'll ever do, and he just wants the credit. And Billy's been doing that his entire life, pretty much. And I think, he just quietly wants to be known by people who are prepared to know him. And he wants the credit. And I think there's a little bit of peace of mind, perhaps, that comes to him and maybe his family from it being there in a strange sort of way.
Yeah, it's got to be unbelievable to have lived a life that really wasn't yours, to go through everything he went through with the surgeries. Of course, going back to the trauma-based mind control that he tells us about in the book as well. For those who are listening that don't know, in memoirs, it says that his earliest recollection of being in a trauma-based program was when he was 3 years old. And he said he was mentored and tutored by Crowley. Billy was born in 1937. Aleister Crowley died in 1947. There's the 10 years. How you can live your life as a deception for a huge chunk of it, to me, is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is pretty staggering. And I guess you have to have been through some kind of programming in order to be able to do that, because most people would buckle.
Yeah, he must have an incredible ability to compartmentalize.
Oh, yeah.
Which, of course, would have been part of the trauma-based mind control.
Yeah, but there's a sense of sort of schizophrenia in the book, because in one breath he'll talk about love, and the next moment he's talking about after a massive worldwide depopulation, like we want you to love your brother, but at the same time, genocide.
Yep, there is that aspect of the book where he's here and then he's over there.
Yeah. There's a chapter about landmines. Landmines don't love. Yeah, neither does genocide, Billy. What are you doing?
Well, and the thing too is that he's a product of the very people in the system that have created this mess.
Yeah.
And in a way, I guess, he's thinking he wants to separate himself from it a little bit. Maybe he doesn't agree with everything, but at the end of the day, he is a proponent of the agenda.
Of course he is.
He's telling people go out and get that,
Oh, yeah, we had that all over British TV, all the sirs, including him, all the sirs on TV, go and get the needlecraft.
where do you think you're going next with your presentations and your research, Kat? Is it something that you do as you get to it? Do you have maybe some ideas with regard to other work that you want to do? How do you go about pulling the presentations together? How do you decide what it is that you want to report on?
Sure. Well, it's kind of back and forth because I started, like anyone, just making notes in the actual book and underlining passages and then going off and looking up things. And then you realize you've run out of room, so you're into notebooks. And I did that for, 3-4 versions of the book now. And then it's like, oh, well, I better start writing it down on a laptop, because there's too much of it. And it accumulates. And then you end up with stuff all over your hard drive. you must
I know
you
that
must
well.
know exactly the same thing. You end up with stuff all over your hard drive. You're like, well, there's notes on this, and there's articles on this, and there's film clips of this, and how do I draw a narrative from it all? You have to sort of take stock and step back from it and think, well, there is some stuff here, but I'm sure I haven't quite drawn out everything yet. So I need to go away and think about that. So normally it comes to a point where I just think, what can I most easily do next? Because I don't want to give myself extra work. I'm still doing work. I'm still going back over things. I'm trying to find that project I did 25 years ago where I analyzed all the Beatles songs and think, can I do something with that?
Yeah, that was a phenomenal undertaking.
Yeah, well, I didn't elect to do it. I was told.
I know, but it's still.
I don't know if something will come from that. I thought about one of the other things I'm into is graphology. I've been into graphology for about 30 years, and I'm not an expert, but whenever I meet someone, I like to look at their handwriting because I know that their handwriting doesn't lie. However they've presented themselves to the world, whatever's happened to them will come out in their handwriting, because most people will form their basic style by the time they're 12 or 13. So much of what happened to them as a child sort of is manifested in their handwriting. And if you've looked at the Beatles' handwriting, it's fascinating. You look at Billy's handwriting, that's very interesting. And John's handwriting is even more interesting. You can see that there must clearly have been abuse in that background somewhere. You can see it. So, that's another thing I'm sort of interested in. In fact, I know this is a bit sad, but I have such a sort of forensic, holistic sort of turn of mind that I thought, what must it be like to have to suddenly do everything left-handed? And I play the piano and the saxophone and some other wind instruments, but you can't play them left-handed. You just play them how you play them. I thought, well, the only way I can experience what that's like is to learn to write left-handed. So I learned to write left-handed, just to have, it's not even for a video, it's just to have an insight into Billy's mind, what it must be like to have to flip things over like that. I know that he doesn't do everything left-handed all the time, and he certainly doesn't write left-handed all the time, but it just gave me, I don't know, a sort of psychological insight into how difficult it must be to have to do everything essentially back to front.
I have a video of him. It's an interview. I guess it goes back maybe, 3 or 4 years ago, where he explains that as a child, he was taught to write backwards.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of programming that took place with him. Now, with you learning to write left-handed, how quickly did it take you to feel like, I'm pretty good at it?
Well, I did the only sort of logical thing I could think of. I started with those books that you buy for children, practice books. I did a couple of those, and then I got a notebook, and I thought, well, I need something to actually copy out. So I thought, well, it's obvious, isn't it? You copy out Beatles lyrics. Let's fully embrace the left-hand path here. Let's go for it. And I think it took about 2 months to get to a point where my handwriting was sort of like my right hand when I was about 12 or 13. So it was sort of fluid, but it didn't have the finesse, of my adult hand.
Yeah.
And after that, it's sort of a very slow, gradual improvement. I started doing that about 6 months ago. So, I mean, it's completely legible. It's not that difficult. It's slightly awkward. It's not as good as my right hand, but it's not too bad, actually. It's improved my playing, actually, oddly. Because although I had a lot of dexterity in my hands because I played the piano all my life, doing something very fine-tuned, like writing, does improve your ability to use your left hand to do pretty much everything else. I now find myself actually able to do a lot of things with my left hand that I didn't do beforehand. And I frequently pick up things with my left hand. So it's obviously done something to my brain. And my brain didn't need any things done to it. It was already crazy enough.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you're crazy. Actually, your story, your background is very, very interesting. Let me ask this question here. As you've engaged in your own research, do you find yourself still going back to other people's research, or do you find that there's a process where, okay, I understand where these other researchers are at. I understand the basis of their assumptions, their conclusions, and then you primarily now just focus on your own work? Or do you still page back to other people's work?
Oh, no, it's a good mixture. Yeah, I have so many books on the book list. There are so many film clips. There are so many videos by other people that I have in a playlist, and I go back and forth all the time because, you don't reinvent the wheel. You build on it. Don't dismiss it unless you think it's actually just completely wrong. But that's rarely the case. It might be the case that you need to connect more dots, but where this work sort of links up to other conspiracies and other psyops, people have already done that work. You don't need to do it again. So you're just dot connecting. Obviously there's always new stuff to be done. I thought the other day about that chapter in Memoirs that's about his artwork, Billy's artwork. He had an exhibition.
Yeah.
I think it was back in the 90s. And I have, because I was an art student formerly, I have a lot of art books. And one of the books I have is his. I have, all the pictures that he had in that exhibition. And first of all, there's a lot of symbolism. And second of all, you can see the thread in style connecting back to Crowley. If you've looked at Crowley's artwork, again, the symbolism, it's quite crude. I mean, looks like it was done by an 8-year-old, to be honest. I mean, that sounds mean, but it's true. Still, there's symbolism, and that's the important thing. And I think that you can connect things from that back to the psyop. Like, for example, there's allegedly, it's a painting that Crowley did. I wonder if it was actually done by Lady Frida Harris, the illustrator for the Thoth deck. But anyway, it's attributed to him, and it's 4 or 5 magicians in red robes and hats carrying a black goat over a snowy hill. Look at that picture and then watch the wizards scene in Magical Mystery Tour and tell me they aren't connected.
Right.
Right? So you can make connections in the oddest of places. And that's how I'm sort of approaching the whole story, really. Like later on this year in June, there's the exhibition of what is meant to be the photography of Paul.
Yes.
Back in 63 and 64, Eyes of the Storm. Now, whether it actually genuinely will be or not, I don't know, but I do have a ticket. I will go. I will have a think about it. It might be nothing. It might be just a continuation of the ticker tape parade, or it might be something, and I won't know until I go.
What do you think is the probability that Billy's biological father is Aleister Crowley?
I don't know. And I mean, that's the honest answer. But he clearly wants it to be. Well, somebody does, because they keep egging this one up. They keep bringing it up. So it's obviously important to the narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, he calls himself the son of the magician.
Right, and he refers to Crowley as Father Crowley, but he's doing it. It's kind of coy the way he does that. He's trying to apply the label with regard to Crowley being the father of modern Satanism.
Yeah.
But I think it goes both ways. I think he's also trying to point us in a direction that AC is his biological father. But I don't know. I won't say yes or no definitively unless something definitive lands on my lap.
Well, yeah, quite. I mean, I did a little video on his bloodlines, just exploring the possibilities. But I mean, I didn't come to any definitive outcome because I can't, can I?
No.
I mean, how do I know? How does any of us know? All you can do is do your best to sort of investigate it and think what's possible.
Well, Kat, it's been a fascinating discussion, a real treat to be able to connect with you and just to talk, and your channel is Supernatural Beatles. And I'll put the link down below, folks, so that you can subscribe. And please do subscribe. As I've said, Kat, your presentation style is excellent. Clearly, the work is very thought out. It's articulated very well. It's something that I found to be very impressive. And
Well, thank you very much. You're really kind. And I'm very grateful to you for posting links to my videos because I mean, no one would know who I was or where I am. So otherwise.
Well, you're covering ground that I think needs to be covered if somebody is interested in this topic, the Beatles and Paul is dead. And as I've mentioned to others that who were digging in, I'm really happy for it because as one person, because people will always ask me, they'll say, "Oh, why don't you cover this and why don't you take a look at that?" And you just can't get to it all.
No, of course not.
So the more the merrier. And folks always ask me, "Are you going to dig into John Lennon or George Harrison? Are you going to look into the Doors? Are you going to start getting into the Rolling Stones?" Like, no, I'm not going to do that. Right? This whole McCartney Beatles thing is enough. In fact, I just put a video up yesterday and said that, with the level of content I put out, I just need to take a break, need to step back and re-engage with other aspects of my life,
Yeah, no, I get that. Absolutely. Because it can really overwhelm you. You can feel, what is it they call it, black-pilled by the whole thing. Absolutely. And I find I have to go and do some zazen, do some meditation and just clear the head and then come back to it. But there's plenty to be done there. I kind of look at it like ripples in a pond. You start in the middle where you have the story with Paul and Billy, and then you can work out to the other members of the band, their entourage, the other musicians they knew. You can work out, but at a certain point, you're just going to have to say, yeah, we're kind of done now. And I've got other projects I want to do.
Exactly.
I've got other musical things I want to do.
Well, do you write any of your own music?
Yeah, I write sort of a neoclassical sort of music. So symphonic work, string quartets, wind trios, that kind of thing. But more importantly, I'm very passionate about music education since that's what I actually do. And, I sort of want to write some courses, on that sort of thing, because I know the way that I teach music theory in particular is very different. I have a sort of local reputation of being the fixer when it comes to music theory, because it gets left. People aren't very interested. They kind of think of it as boring. And I have to turn someone around very, very quickly in order for them to pass an assessment, in order to get any further, because of the way that grades work is you have to have a sort of base minimum before you're allowed to do advanced exams. So I turn people around pretty quickly. So I want to do stuff like that. I don't want to be doing this forever, but there's plenty still to be done. So I'm happy to carry on. And I like the puzzle of it. I like the sort of forensic nature of it. And it sort of reminds me of Dirk Gently. Do you know Dirk Gently?
No.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So Douglas Adams had another series, which was Dirk Gently, the lesser-known series. And Dirk Gently ran a holistic detective agency. And he was like a private detective and an investigator. And he solved crimes by being willing to see the whole problem as holistically as possible. And he would connect things that seemed so completely random and unconnected on the surface, but actually they were integral to each other. And I try to think of memoirs and the Beatles psyop, the McCartney conspiracy, I try to think in the same way and try and step back and see the big picture.
Because there is a big picture.
There is. It's a very big picture.
Very big picture. And that's the thing, folks that just want to focus on just the replacement or the swapping out of biological Paul McCartney. I mean, you have to start there. But it goes so far beyond that.
Oh, yeah, it really does. It's way beyond that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Kat, an absolute pleasure. Seriously, it was a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground. It was really nice to speak to you. And we'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
Someday. Yeah, when you're ready. And folks, again, Kat's channel, Supernatural Beatles. It's on YouTube. The link will be down below in the description box. Go there, watch the content, and make sure you subscribe. And if you just hang on for a bit after we disconnect here from recording, we'll just chat a little bit more, and I'll let you get on with your day.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.